Good afternoon. Today is November 4th, 2022. This is UnitedTV. My name is Kemal Erkan. I'm here with Sean Dunnigan. Sean, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. This is an important week as we are going into the election week, November 8th.
Yep, Tuesday.
But before we do that, we are going to get an update on our COVID and monkeypox, and let me actually bring them in. So this was pretty uneventful from the COVID standpoint.
Yeah, our COVID numbers seem to be consistently lower now. We had that strong decline over the past few months, and now they've kind of plateaued at these lower levels, which obviously is a good sign. You'd rather them plateau low than plateau high and remain up there. So from a COVID standpoint, week to week, it seems like it's going to be pretty constant. And then just a reminder that as of 3 weeks ago, the CDC stated that they were reporting less frequently on those COVID statistics. So some of the data that you're seeing here that we're going to be presenting may not be up to date. It may be a week to a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks delayed at times. So just keep that in mind as we see some of these numbers, if that's going to impact the weekly trends that we've seen comparisons in the past. It's going to be a little bit altered now going forward. So that's our COVID update. And then from the monkeypox stance, it's actually pretty similar that we have still only 41 case count in the state of Delaware, and it's actually plateaued also across the nation as it's still under 29,000, which it's been roughly around that 28,500 number for the past couple of weeks. And if we look at the actual trend on the trend line on that graph, you'll see that it's steadily declining, and it looks like it's just going lower and lower. So kind of interesting that kind of fell out of the news also. We know it was a big hype and there was talk about it, but
so the media probably is focusing on the elections these days and the COVID. But I think from our own United Medical ACO numbers, just a comparison, the first week of October, we had 496 hospitalizations. And the last week of October, that number is 578. So that's about 20%, almost 20% more.
Yeah.
Now, I also checked the 2021 October versus this year. Last year, we had about 2,090 total hospitalizations, and then this year we are at 2,400. So that's 16%, I guess. So that's about 310 more than last year.
Yeah.
So when you look at these numbers, this is actually kind of what we are trying to remind people, that what's happening today is whether or not you hear this from the media, things are happening, and then this winter is going to be with the flu and not paying attention to the COVID. The mix of that is going to be kind of like the perfect storm. So we do want people to be more mindful, at least just looking at these numbers. Just these are actual hospitalizations. These are not the government data. These are our private data based on our patients with the same number of same group of people last year versus this year. So that means if we are about 16 to 20% more chance of going to the hospital, that kind of gives you some background on. These are not all COVID related necessarily. However, if the hospital utilization is high, and especially in the right in the beginning of winter, then these numbers are just going to go up in January, February timeframe. So we just want to make sure that people remember these. So we are going to cover the election a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So well, let's do it.
Yeah, we did touch on it a little bit last week when we had Senator McBride and Representative Minor Brown on the show. But we have a little bit more in-depth detail this week, get a little bit more specific. We're even going to touch a little bit on the state of Pennsylvania and what's going on there. As we know, close proximity to us here, that will have some impact. So we want to follow along there as well.
So now why this midterm is important, and some people may not know, not every country they don't have their election system similar to us in terms of how we are electing people, like, because we have the House people are every 2 years, and the Senate is every 6 years, and the governors are every 4 years, and the president is every 4 years. So then this midterm is happening in a way that any type of change may be happening on the regular cycle. If someone is replaced outside of the election time, they would be elected. This happened to Chris Coons when Joe Biden actually became the vice president. So then he, instead of running in 2008, he became a senator in 2010. But we have a lot of people are up for different seats. But what the background that I want to give is the inflation is being at 9%, which is one of the highest in the last 40 years. S&P 500 is down about 22%. NASDAQ is about 34% down. Gas prices, and I was just on the phone with my dad on FaceTime when I was driving here. If you remember when we started doing these sessions with you, when you joined actually us in November timeframe last year, it was $2.75. The gas price was. Right now it's $3.90.
Good old days.
So I'm sorry, it's $4.90. What I'm saying, I'm talking about the 93, not the 91.
The high octane.
So the 2.75 versus $4.90, and also well-being of the president is in question. The mental health of the president is in question. So this election is going to be different than 2020 election. So that's what we want to kind of like talk about. And even in some of the very deep blue states, things are changing. And that's because these, if you don't mind me just repeating this, inflation is at 9%. The stock market is anywhere from 22 to 34% down. Gas prices are up by 100%, and the well-being of president is in question. So this is why this election is more important from several different points. So
definitely, and adding on that, how you're repeating about the inflation, we did mention last week that of the concerns of voters this round, the highest priority was the economy, and followed by inflation on what they were most concerned about going into this election, and what's obviously impacting their lives the most. And like you're saying, some of these historically blue states, obviously California, New York, Delaware, being historically blue, may see a little bit pushback in terms of just the fact that the economy has so much to do with the voters this year and what they're prioritizing and what they're valuing most. So
a number of people who are up for the House, do we have that number?
Let's see here. I know we have
the 62.
I believe so. Let's see. Might be on the wrong slide here. Let's see. So I have the general election candidates, and that's for our Delaware. We're looking for the total.
So what we know is the Senate actually is, it may come down to 5 states who are going to be the decision makers, right?
Yeah,
so,
the toss-up ones we have.
So this is the same thing for the House.
One of those that we were actually going to focus on a little bit was Pennsylvania. Was one of those toss-up ones where there is the solid red, solid blue. Then we do have the ones in the middle where it's most likely going to happen, but there's a chance. But the ones that are actually toss-up looks like Nevada, Georgia, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. And that's why we actually want to focus a little bit on Pennsylvania.
So John Donnelly sent me a message. Everyone in the House, which I was just saying earlier, every 2 years. So everyone is up in the House. Thank you, John. So I think the Senate is going to be the main key factor here. So let's talk about Pennsylvania a little bit. So we know that in the beginning, Dr. Oz was not the favorite.
Correct. Yeah.
So now that's kind of changed, I guess.
Yeah, in the recent polls, it said that he's actually taken a slight lead. on what they're expecting. You know, he's going up against Democrat Fetterman there. Lately, I've been seeing both their commercials in between ads on shows, and it's funny. I mean, I guess it's typical for what politicians their ads, but it seems like both commercials want to point out the wrong things that the other party is doing or the other person or their candidate is doing. But I think what they should focus on maybe sometimes is what they're going to do right. That may be a little bit more important going in the future instead of pointing out the flaws what the other people have done wrong in the past. But I guess whatever the studies show work best with their commercials and advertising and marketing. But yes, we have Dr. Oz.
Why do you think that like someone? I guess what's important is when we use the term deep blue. So we are talking about states who are always Democrats. Yeah. So I guess in those cases, do you think maybe these parties taking their position for granted, so that whoever they will nominate will be elected?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we may have been talking earlier in the week a little bit about that, but I feel like if, like you're saying, it's consistently a one-sided party victory that's represented in a state, maybe those people who are representing that party in that particular state, like you're saying, may take it for granted and not necessarily have to go out above and beyond to make their presence known or to make their campaign and what they plan to do as strong as other, say, potential swing states where it could go either way, and you really have to go out and campaign, where you're saying they might just be taking their foot off the gas pedal a little bit and kind of posting through some of these as they expect to just win, with no real challenge.
So I guess in like California, because it's a very Democrat state, so if I put this water bottle as a candidate from the Democrats, they think that
it
people are
very well win,
right? And that doesn't work that way. So I guess that's what we are going to learn in Pennsylvania. Most likely, Dr. Oz is going to win. Most likely. Now, I don't know the Fetterman much, but just looking at a couple of the debates,
first impressions,
it was tough to watch. Why would they put some, like Dr. Oz is extremely intelligent, like whether you agree with him or not. We have disagreements on certain things, but he's way out there, very intellectual. Like it's not just him, like his family, like he comes from a very strong background. So putting someone who's like a water bottle in front of him, it almost tells me that you don't respect the people who are voting for you. So you can't do that. So I'm sure in Pennsylvania we had better options.
Yeah, and it's interesting that this is the candidate that ended up.
And because like this is 34 out of 100 seats are up for election, and Pennsylvania is going to be one of those states who's going to actually make this more difficult for Democrats, because if Democrats loses PA, chances of them being on the Republican taking the majority is highly likely.
Yeah, we know it was a big state back in the 2020 election. So
right,
definitely want to pay attention to that. But yeah, as you're saying, do you also want to respect the voters and have someone that can actually represent people accurately and do the best of their ability and take their job serious, and also, like you're saying, with the education, somebody who's actually qualified. We know when we had Lydia York on the show, and we talked with her, and you can see she's very well educated, has the background, has the necessary skills. Yeah, so that's who you want to be out there working for your problem. So
well, similar to our guest last week, they were both very strong. So if they were in that debate with Dr. Oz, they would have done a lot better than Fetterman. So I think this is how we are going to learn. Maybe this is also showing that maybe we are not really, our president maybe not paying enough attention to the elections, because he's from Scranton, so PA is important for him. So it's going to be an interesting election for Pennsylvania to see how that's going to turn out. So we'll see. Now Arizona, I believe, is also up, right? If I'm not mistaken.
Arizona is one of the toss-up states. Yeah.
Yeah.
That we have.
So that's also, we know that from, I think it may be staying on the Democrat side just because of what happened with Trump and McCain family. But that's, I think after what has happened in the last 2 years, certain things, people, when they believe that, I think when it comes down to economy, it's one of our most important things. So if you're not able to do certain things, we really don't care about social issues as much. And we know that, especially in the last 6, 7, 8 months, the economy is the key. We have never seen inflation. It's like inflation, we say 9%, but that's not true. I just said that gas prices are up by 100%. So any major expense is up minimum 30%. So this inflation is kind of like the average, and the methodology has changed in March, I believe, or April. So if you really look at the actual inflation, I don't believe it's less than 30%. Okay. Are we good with elections or?
Yeah, I mean, as you're saying, though, just to kind of wrap it up, the economy is obviously what people are valuing a lot here. And obviously, if you look at the two parties that have very drastically different approaches to certain economic policies and how that's actually going to impact people's day-to-day expenses and lives. So that's why, as we're saying, some of these states may see a different pushback that they weren't necessarily expecting in years past, just because of how drastic our economy has been these past 2 years, and specifically the last 8 or 9 months, as you're saying. So just pay attention to that.
We are going to maybe discuss in the U.S. economy section, but the Fed raising the interest rates, this has severe impact on day-to-day life for everyone. So I think some bad choices are being made. So we'll see.
And I mean, we might touch on this a little bit later on the U.S. economy when we get to that with slides pertaining particularly to that. But we did know, I think it was Bernie Sanders who was actually saying that the Democrats aren't taking the economy as serious, and that they should be doing, or at least presenting what their plan is to help combat it, as opposed to just saying we're doing all right, things are going to be all right, as opposed to.
Well, so when you, I think we'll go through this on the economy section, but maybe if you look at the president's agenda, and last week I asked this question to Sarah McBride, and I didn't want to, because it's not a debate program, so we are inviting them, and we want to make sure that we actually we ask them certain questions, but it's not like for debate. But on the focus of President Biden, I definitely know that the interest or the focus is not fully there. If you really pay attention to what he says, you are not hearing the inflation. You are not hearing some of the major social issues. You are not hearing gas prices. You are not hearing wages, the mortgage rates. These are all important. So you are a new homeowner, and you are right in the middle of this, and then you know how the interest rates are changing. And when this is already impacting people at every level, then you know that you want to hear it from the president, so then you know that they have a plan. But the plan cannot be just asking the oil companies to reduce their profits or this or that. You have to have a plan in place. And then paying attention to the national debt being at over 31 trillion, which is for us from day one, we are telling people how this number is increasing. Anything else is going to be less important if you don't have a strong economy. So the increasing interest rates is only a patch. It's not a long-term fix.
Correct.
So, let's go to the globe and see what's happening around the world, because a lot of stuff are happening.
Yeah. We're actually going to kick it off with more election talk, but on a global scale here. So we did have in Brazil a few days ago, they had their election. Interesting what happened post-election with the one candidate trying not to, I guess, accept defeat, holding out, trying to see if there's recount of votes maybe, but also leading to protests. Which is
Well,
similar.
so like what I find out is like this Bolsonaro guy is like similar. This is the Brazilian Trump. So
Yeah, I said he's a far right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know if it's far right, but I think like he's kind of like a Trump style that he has. So, and the guy who's elected now, Lula, is he did serve I think 2 terms, but then there was some corruption issue that he was in jail, and now he's elected. And then this guy is like 76 or 77 years old. So what's interesting is like these old people, like they're old. Like they're old. Like if this is the case, I'm gonna ask my dad to run for the election for next term. So he's 81. So like maybe he's just right at his age.
That's perfect
Like
time.
what is going on with these old people? Why are they running? Why are they so like power hungry? What is it that they can actually really provide for the job that's so demanding? I mean, this is like age is important. So 76 to 81 is now seems like the average for you to be in power in any country, except there are exceptions. But so these guys are old and they're in jail, but they still come back and they want to run for this.
That's definitely
interesting, right? So, but I think what we know is that why we discuss these things again, the relationship that they have with us is important. So what we also find out is like when you look at the Brazil's export, the biggest one they have is with China. That's about 87 billion, and then US is around like 31 billion, and then we are number 2 for their export. So that means it's a big market for China. Same thing from the import standpoint. China is their number 1 with 47 billion, and then US is about 40. So what I see is there's a little bit imbalance there. So I think maybe perhaps this all comes down to trade war. Like this happened in Africa with China and US. This happened in Europe, in the East Europe. This happened in Asia and Taiwan, and all these. When I said Asia, I meant more like the Pakistan, India, Afghanistan, but then there's also Taiwan. So this is more about the trades than anything else. So if it's going to affect our policies, what's happening in these countries, that's why we are talking about these. Right. So, but it was interesting that their export is almost 3 times more with China than with US. So I think that's going to have some impact overall in the in our relationship with them. So then the way that they were kind of comparing the guy Bolsonaro as like the Trump, you can see why they're doing it, but I don't know if it's a compliment or an insult. Right. So it depends which side you're on.
Yeah, who you're talking to.
Yeah. So now we had, what's next we have? So we had like this stuff in South Korea was interesting.
Yeah, so it was actually a disaster there with the crowd stampede during the Halloween gathering parade, I guess. And I think it was over 150 people they said were actually crushed to death because it was overcrowding. But just to note that it was like their first big event since all of their COVID restrictions. So I guess a lot of people wanted to get out, but unfortunately, I think it was over 150 people died because it said the crowd was estimated over to be 100,000 in the narrow alleyway streets. So,
well, what was interesting, I saw a couple of the videos when some people were getting CPR, some people were still dancing. And I think these types of crowds, that it always scares me anyway. So, but I think people really need to be a little bit smarter than that. But there may be some other reasons for these. Maybe something else happened in the air, some chemical maybe was given, and then because all of a sudden people start reacting that way, it was kind of like there was no reason for crowd to actually start doing crazy stuff. So maybe more will come out from that. I think from the global standpoint, one of the most important thing is, which we discussed before, is the nuclear war.
Yep.
And the jeopardy that we may be in. And in my opinion, at some local level, these things are going to be, they're going to try these. I don't know if it's going to be at the global level, but at a like isolated local level, I think we'll see some nuclear war in the next 8 to 12 months, maybe even earlier. But I definitely see that coming. Before it was like almost like unthinkable. But now, with everything else that's happening, it becomes more like if they never. Why do you have these weapons if you're not able to try them?
Yeah, I mean, it could just be that you want to have as a, I guess not threatening, but we could use it, in your back pocket type thing. But also, if you're following here with the media, when we're saying how there's the propaganda going on that they think there's going to be the dirty bomb, which they're saying with Ukraine, how it's going to look like, oh, they attacked first, so that gives us reason to.
No one is innocent, right? So everyone is like our side, their side, no one is innocent because they want to. If you own these things and if you never try them, there's no purpose of owning them. I guess if you don't want to destroy them, like everyone should agree and then destroy all the nuclear weapons. They don't do that.
Yeah, I mean, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, and with that. Back in the day, there was a lot of militarism and building up of these weapons of mass destruction, and that there was, the period where they wanted to disarm all these nuclear warheads. But now it seems like the reverse is happening. We're seeing even with Korea, North and South Korea, what's going on there, where they're testing all these different missiles and building up their military, having all the different aircraft flying past, I guess, the red line between North and South Korea, entering the different unrestricted zones. So. Like you're saying, something seems like it's developing, like you're saying, maybe the next 8 to 12 months where
I think I see that's coming because it's almost like if someone or some people or some countries, they are actually stirring the pot in a way that, okay, so if these things are done, then we can do X. That X is the nuclear war. So, interesting enough, like the former Prime Minister Imran Khan from Pakistan, there was an assassination attempt for him, and he's okay. But these types of things, when you make those regions unstable, it's a perfect time to do whatever you want to do.
Yeah.
So, and he's being supported by his people. At least half of his people are on his side. So, although he lost the election, but it was kind of like almost like it was taken away from him because I think the military is extremely strong still in Pakistan. And this attempt is pretty meaningful in terms of making that region unstable.
Yeah, and we were even talking about that in some of the previous sessions where it seems like this conflict has never resolved, and if it is, it's for a very, very brief period of time. All of a sudden something else starts developing with these different regimes and these different civil wars, different groups that are trying to overthrow whatever form of government's in power at that time. And we do want to zoom out and just say, like, who's benefiting from all this, and what potential is there to be gained in some of these situations? Like you say, you just keep poking at it and all of a sudden something's going to blow up, no pun intended. But if you just keep egging at something going on and on and on, eventually you meet a threshold where something's going to happen where in the one instance we're talking about the nuclear war, other ones are talking about these uprisings and the protests are violent, overthrowing different regimes. So definitely interesting. I want to pay attention to it.
So I know we didn't include this next item we have, but I think the situation with Cuba, and there was a UN General Assembly resolution. Apparently, this is happening every year, So this year it was a little bit different than the other years, probably, or maybe similar. 182 countries who are okay to lift these restrictions versus it's only right now US and Israel who are still
Keeping them in place. Yeah.
keep the embargo in place. Then this is one of those. I guess in some cases it's an unfairness. So because if one of the five members of the UN is vetoing the decision, then it doesn't matter what 182 says.
No.
So like just imagine like you live in this world that there are 185 or 84 countries, and regardless of what happens, one of those fives needs to be just if they're on the opposite side, then the decision cannot go. Yeah. Now, and you don't want to be the devil's advocate, but I think maybe in some ways we do because we are independent. So like the situation in Cuba and our position rightfully, what we expect on our borders is probably what Russia is expecting in their borders. Right. So
fair comparison.
And it's not going to be okay if something is, if it's unfair, it's unfair. If you don't want others to do it, you shouldn't be doing it. So, or you should be understanding. But in some cases, I think being right, like how much power you have is changing who's right and who's wrong.
Yeah.
So
yeah, whose opinion matters a little bit more.
I mean, we are lucky that we live here and then we are on the right side of the equation. But then if we were on the other side, we would be probably not, we wouldn't be happy, right? So, all right, so now we can go back to the US economy, which is not so great these days.
Yeah, as we were mentioning earlier in this session, but bringing back to it, how experts, the title of this one article is Experts See a Resilient US Economy and Voters Aren't Buying It. And that's literally what we were talking about for the whole election day portion and a little bit that we touched on with the economy. But it has such a big impact on the day-to-day lives of people. And it's one thing to acknowledge that it's, that we're having some struggles, but we don't have a plan for it. But it's another thing to be denying it and pretending like there isn't a problem, that it's going great.
Are they denying or are they not realizing it?
Yeah. I'd hope if they're experts in the US economy that they would know and that they're just denying it, because if they're not actually acknowledging and realizing, then.
So, I was mentioning earlier, so one of the US economy is what we are actually watching is the Fed raising the interest rates or lowering the interest rates. And then they have done it since February, I believe. Consistently, they increased it.
0.75%.
It's the final one was one of the biggest one. So just to kind of remember what happens when the Fed raises the interest rates, because we don't pay attention and then we don't actually remember, even if this is almost like our provider meetings, like we present a lot of stuff, but if they feel like it doesn't actually, it's not relevant for them for that week, they don't pay attention. But then all of a sudden, like 10 weeks later, we are like, they find out something happening and then they missed out. And they're like, oh, no one told us this. And that's not the case. So, because these are my notes from May 6, 2022. And then also there are older notes in March. So the reason we had these notes is because they're useful to just bring it up. So when the increase happens, this is going to be reflected on the credit card rates. So if someone is paying, 7% on the credit cards, it's going to go up to 11% or 12% or more. Just giving examples. These are going to affect the savings and the CD rates. So these are already affecting the mortgage rates. So the average mortgage rate was,
I think it's up to like 7.2, then it might be up to like 7.8 now.
So that was about 2
30 years,
right? So it was 2.65, and now it's 7.08%. So that's more than a little over 3 times, right?
Yeah. I mean, it all depends on what like your credit score is, what state you're in, what type of mortgage you're going for. But yeah, on the average 30-year fixed, it's over 7%, which just a couple of years ago was at like 2.5%.
So the auto loans, like this is like after mortgage, and then after credit cards, one of the other maybe most common loan that we use is for auto, and that's going to increase. And the investments returns are going to be impacted, which we interestingly, when we are capturing this from every aspect of the economy, when you look at the stock market, when the stock market is down from 22 to 34% average from different platforms, our savings are gone, our investments are gone, our 401ks are gone. So, and this is what the interest on the increase on these interests are doing, and we are hoping that they really understand that this is it. Remember what we were saying, that this is a different type of crisis. This is not what has happened in the past. So this has two big impacts. One is the 2 years being lost due to COVID, and the other one is the war that's happening at the current time. So what else do we have on the time here?
Well,
we're like just giving bad news. Like I feel like just like horrible news. Like, just give some good news.
I guess depends if you work at Twitter or not. But since Elon actually did officially buy Twitter, he said he did fire the CEO, and then it's going to be a downsizing layoff of, I think they said it was estimated like 3,200 employees he was planning to let go, which obviously that had an impact on Twitter's stock, their revenue coming back. But it's going to be interesting on what happens in this next year, his first year of actually being the CEO of Twitter. We're talking about the limitations that were put on certain people's freedom of speech on that platform, and almost that there's a little bit too much power given to that on you can just ban or block people for certain durations, and who's actually regulating that. Elon wanted to bring back where it would be free for everyone. But now we also have the other factor of the Twitter Blue, where it's going to be a subscription monthly if you want to have certain features. $8 to have certain features.
He actually tweeted like there's a Starbucks coffee comp, and then
one of these.
And then
just give up one coffee.
The blue check. So, but I think so. This is almost a year that we are doing this together. In the beginning, at least from my perspective, Elon was at a different place. I think he did lose some credit in the last 12 months, I would say. I mean, that's
fair. I mean,
like, I think he's a little bit more crazier than maybe I thought he was.
Well, yeah, back when we were fine with like Neuralink, and we're thinking like the technology advances and innovations he was focused on, but now there might be different motives. We'll see. So
now Twitter actually is like, this is actually if people remember what happened to President Trump. So I think that was kind of like a wake up call for me. So because Twitter, in my opinion, or Facebook, or like LinkedIn, these should be like the utility companies should be treated like although they are owned by private people, that doesn't matter. So this should be like a utility. So you don't actually get to pick and choose who's going to be on it and what's going to be told. I mean, I have so many disagreements with President Trump, former president, so many, but still that decision was, okay, so that means if they do it to this person, they're going to do it to someone else. It doesn't matter. And then this is going to be done by some people at Twitter. So it's not a judge who's going to decide. It's not the court system, it's the Twitter. So now when you are the voice of many and you become this platform, I don't think you can do that. So that was my wake up call with Twitter. So, and also like it's very biased in so many ways that you see, like if you have the terrorist group from Middle East is on Twitter, they do whatever they want to do. I don't know if Putin is on Twitter, but I'm sure many Russians who are in the war right now, they are on. And if then your president cannot be.
Right.
And they did that when he was the president.
It's interesting, what they're deciding to regulate, those terms and conditions.
That was wrong. That was like way wrong. So, and that's not their, their place to make that decision. So you cannot just cut the voice of the president of the United States in the United States. So that's a brave, tough, and stupid call that they made, and then I think they're paying the price for that.
I agree.
So is Trump back yet?
I think Elon said his plan was to have him remain off for like a couple months, and then once I guess he's been in his position for enough time, or he has the more important things, I guess, to manage and address first. Yeah, I'm sure he's a busy man, but it looks like his plan though eventually is to have him.
Well, one of the things maybe we should give Elon credit for, he started doing the intermittent diet, and I think he did watch the session that I did with Dr. Erkan on the Bariatric Friday. So apparently he lost 30 pounds or so. So maybe he's watching us, like secretly he's watching. So who knows?
Could be.
So in the last 2 years, we host so many local politicians, and I believe each one of them, regardless of their parties, although they were all Democrats, we invited all the Republicans, and we don't get any responses.
We do reach out.
So maybe Sean and I will run for Republicans for the next election after 2024.
If I win and you invite me on the show, I will join.
No, I thought we were going to run together. So, so, but if not, then I'll support you. But I mean, Republicans in Delaware should really change their game, because I texted you yesterday. There's a Mike Castle example where this guy was a long-term Republican. He served so many years. So it's not about the party, but it's about the person and what you are actually, what efforts you put in place. But going back to all the people who join our show and discuss different issues with us, I do want to wish them good luck, and then I think they're all going to be fine. But still, they put a lot of effort out there, and hopefully this election will bring some peace and maybe some hope for the economy and the global issues.
I hope so.
So, well, thank you for listening to us, and we'll be back with the Bariatric Friday at 3 p.m. And also we'll be back next week with the rest of the other items that we have. Thank you for watching us, and we'll see you soon.